Hello, my dear friends. There is a story that will not stay buried. For nearly 4 decades, it has been dismissed, investigated, ridiculed, partially confirmed, officially denied, and then quietly acknowledged in ways that the people doing the acknowledging seem to hope no one would notice. It has circulated through the research communities and the consciousness communities and the spaces where those two worlds overlap with the kind of persistence that does not belong to fabrications. Fabrications fade. This story has only grown. The name most people know it by is Bob Lazar. But what the Pleiadians want to speak about today is not the man. It is the information. Because what Bob Lazar described, in testimony that has been challenged and partially corroborated and never fully refuted in the ways that would have been necessary to truly end the conversation, touches something that the Pleiadians say is among the most significant suppressed truths of the modern era. And in 2026, that truth is finally beginning to come out. What makes this transmission different from the many discussions of Bob Lazar that have circulated over the years is not the content of what he claimed. Most people who have followed this subject are familiar with the basic outlines. The facility, the craft, the propulsion system that violated the known laws of physics not because physics was wrong, but because the physics being applied was more advanced than anything human science had independently developed. The element that should not have existed at the level of stability he described. What makes this different is the context in which the Pleiadians want to place that information. For what? The reason that this specific story, told by this specific person, at this specific moment in human history, keeps returning with renewed force every time the culture might have been expected to let it fade. It keeps returning because it is true, not necessarily in every detail. The Pleiadians are careful here, and they ask the same care of those receiving this transmission. The specific details of one person's account of a classified program carried decades ago should be held with appropriate discernment. But the essential claim at the heart of the story, that humanity has not been alone in this universe, that evidence of this has been in the possession of certain human institutions for longer than the public has been told, and that the suppression of this information has been deliberate and systematic. This, the Pleiadians say, is real. And understanding why it was suppressed is the key to understanding why 2026 is the year when the suppression is finally losing its hold. The suppression was never primarily about national security, though that framing has been consistently offered as the explanation. It was not primarily about preventing panic, though that too has been cited. The Pleiadians describe the actual reason for the suppression with a precision that, once heard, makes everything else about this subject suddenly coherent. The technology that was being studied, they say, did not only represent an advancement in propulsion or energy or material science. It represented evidence of a cosmology, a framework for understanding the nature of reality, the structure of the universe, and the place of human consciousness within it that was fundamentally incompatible with the frameworks upon which the existing systems of human power and control were built. A civilization that genuinely understood and accepted that it was not alone in the universe, that other forms of consciousness had developed technologies based on principles of physics that human science was only beginning to approach, would be a civilization that asked very different questions about its own potential, about what was actually possible, about what limitations were genuine and what limitations were artificial, about who, exactly, had the authority to define the boundaries of human possibility and on what basis that authority rested. These are not comfortable questions for systems of power that depend, for their legitimacy and their continuance, on the maintenance of a particular story about what is real and what is possible. This is why it was suppressed. And this is why the suppression is now failing. The Pleiadians connect this directly to the broader shift in consciousness that characterizes the current period. As more human beings access their own direct perception, as the veil thins, as the frequencies rise, As the inner knowing that was once accessible only to the few becomes available to the many, the stories that were necessary to maintain a population in a particular state of managed ignorance simply stop working. Not because they are exposed by any single dramatic revelation, but because enough people have developed sufficient inner clarity that the stories no longer feel true. The managed ignorance fails because consciousness, when it rises sufficiently, cannot be managed. This is the deeper reason why a story like Bob Lazar's keeps returning. Not because of new evidence, though new evidence does continue to emerge, but because the consciousness of the culture that receives it has changed. The people listening now are not the same people who were listening 40 years ago. The inner instruments of perception that they bring to this information are more refined, more sensitive, more capable of recognizing what is being described as real. And what the Pleiadians want you to understand about this moment is that what is happening with the re-emergence of suppressed information, not just this story, but many others, in many domains, that are finding their way into public consciousness in this period, is not accidental. It is the natural expression of a civilization that is crossing a threshold. Beyond a certain level of collective consciousness, the maintenance of fundamental deceptions about the nature of reality becomes energetically unsustainable. The effort required to keep the suppression in place exceeds what the systems doing the suppressing can continue to provide, and the information begins to surface. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic revelation, but persistently, consistently, from many directions at once, in a way that even those most committed to the maintenance of the old story cannot fully prevent. The hidden truth, in other words, is not being revealed by any external agent of disclosure. It is being revealed by the rising consciousness of the civilization that was kept from it. And the rising consciousness is making the revelation inevitable. What does this mean for you, listening to this transmission? The Pleiadians want to connect this to something personal rather than leaving it in the abstract domain of geopolitics and disclosure timelines. The same dynamic that is causing suppressed information about the nature of the cosmos to surface in the outer world is happening simultaneously in the inner world of awakening human beings. The suppressed truths of your own deeper nature, the knowledge of what you actually are, what you are actually capable of, what the genuine range of your consciousness actually extends to, these are also surfacing in exactly the same way, through the same mechanism of rising frequency overcoming the capacity of old patterns to maintain their hold. The outer disclosure and the inner awakening are the same process. They are happening at the same time because they are the same thing. In the story of one person's account of a suppressed technology that should not have existed is, in the Pleiadian understanding, a mirror of the story of a planet's awakening to capacities of consciousness that should not have been possible within the old framework, and that are becoming not just possible, but undeniable. The hidden truth is coming out, in both directions simultaneously. What was hidden about the nature of the cosmos, and what was hidden about the nature of the consciousness that inhabits it. You are the receiver of both revelations. And the quality of your reception determines not just what you understand, but what you are able to do with what you understand. Take what resonates, leave what does not, and trust yourself completely to know the difference. This content is offered for spiritual reflection, symbolic interpretation, and personal insight only. It is not presented as scientific fact, medical advice, or a prediction of real-world events. The narration in this video is generated using artificial intelligence voice technology. Please use your own discernment and personal judgment when engaging with this material.